everything that they want for their areas simply because they're not good at building relationships or interacting with people. And so it is really important. There's also an interesting study of salesmen that was done by Martin Seligman, who's actually known as one of the fathers of positive psychology. And what he did was he looked at successful insurance salespeople. And what he wanted to do was to see if there were personality characteristics that he could use to predict who would be more effective in the role. And what he found was that the most important characteristics were their optimism. And basically what they found is that people who are optimistic, who can manage their attitudes and who could stay positive, outsold their pessimistic colleagues by 8% in the first year of the study, and then by 31% in the second year. And so again, it wasn't how much they knew about insurance. It wasn't how good they were knocking on doors at the time or making phone calls, but it was their attitude and how they were able to manage that aspect of their emotions. Bradbury and Greaves, so again, those are the ones who had the 4 components of emotional intelligence that I talked about, found in their research that EQ accounts for 50% of performance in all types of jobs. And if you think about your workplace where you might be, or perhaps maybe other workplaces where you've worked before, and you think of the people who are really high performers versus the low performers, think about how their EQ might differ. And you'll likely find that the higher performers are better in terms of interacting with people, knowing how to influence them, and also managing their emotions effectively. They're probably not the ones who are popping off at people unexpectedly or getting really irritable or shutting down emotionally, but they're the people who are able to maintain a healthy emotional balance and have good relationships with others. EQ has also been linked to better leadership. Daniel Goleman found that emotional competencies make up at least 80% of the distinguishing competencies of outstanding leaders. And I would have to say, in my own experience, this is definitely true. Better leaders are the ones who are more emotionally intelligent. And so if you were to think about your best boss, for example, when I ask people that question, a lot of people say that their best boss was someone who got the most out of them, someone who they had a good working relationship with, and someone who seemed to really understand what motivated them. And those are all characteristics that are associated with EQ. And interestingly, even in the military, where you might think of people not having a high EQ, when I think of a stereotypical drill sergeant, it's not someone with a high EQ. But what they found is that the best Navy commanders were people who were more outgoing, positive, warm, and cooperative. So again, they were higher in EQ. And they were also found to be more friendly, more democratic, and more likable, more fun to be around, more appreciative, and even gentler than the people who were rated as average leaders. So even in that arena, EQ helps you to be more effective. Emotional intelligence also gives you the tools to manage your mood. And so there's a lot of research that shows you that your positive emotions are linked to better leadership outcomes, and leaders who are more positive, not just in terms of what they say, but also in terms of how they feel, are better leaders. And so that's a lot about how emotional intelligence can help you in the workplace. But emotional intelligence can also help you outside of the workplace as well in your personal life. Emotional intelligence has been shown to be linked to higher relationship quality and also higher relationship satisfaction. And so if you think about it, if you can understand what's going on in yourself and you can manage your reactions as opposed to just blindly reacting based on what's going on internally, then you're likely to be a better relationship partner. Also, if you can understand what's going on with your own partner and really make an effort to listen and comprehend what they're saying, even when you might be feeling upset, then you're going to be better at your relationship and you're going to have a higher quality and likely more satisfying relationship. And particularly for those guys in the audience, what they found is that in heterosexual couples, the better males could read their wives' nonverbal cues, the happier both partners were with their relationship. So guys, again, if you want to be happy, or, the happy wife, happy life, develop your EQ so you can better understand your partner. Researchers also found that people's moods affect their memories. And so what they found is that people who are in a positive mood are more likely to remember positive memories. And the way that this applies to relationships is it helps to explain why when you're upset with your partner, you can remember all their bad qualities, but you can have a hard time remembering their positive ones. And, you might get to the point where you're thinking, why am I with this horrible person at all? But if you're someone who can manage your moods and your emotions, then there's a higher likelihood that you're going to see the relationship in a more positive light and that you remember the more positive times you had together. And so that's obviously going to affect the way that you're going to interact with that person. And then finally, researchers found that your emotions affect forgiveness, and that people who can recognize and understand their own emotions were shown to be more likely to forgive their spouses. And so, in relationships, people aren't perfect, and you're going to need to forgive them at some point. I know there are plenty of opportunities for me to do that in mine. And so the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more likely you are to be compassionate and empathetic and willing to forgive and move on. Day to day, you have irritations that come up in your relationship. And so the bottom line from all this research is that working on your EQ is going to help your relationships across the board. So that's the bottom line of that. And in the next lesson, I'm going to talk about how your emotions affect your brain. And then after that, we'll get into the meat of actually increasing your emotional intelligence with some really practical strategies. And so if you'd like to go ahead and watch that next video now, you can. And that way you'll be able to stay on track in terms of getting this done in the 21 days for the crash course. So I'll see you in the next lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to be talking about how emotions affect your brain. And this is a really important thing for you to understand so that you'll know why it's so important to manage your emotions to be effective, but why it can sometimes be challenging to do. And so this is a way in psychology that we explain about how our emotions can affect our higher level thinking. And basically the way it's conceptualized is that we have three brains: the reptile brain, the mammal brain, and the angel brain. So let's start with the reptile brain. Now, the reptile brain is the part of the brain that is the thalamus and the brainstem. And basically, it's a part of the brain that becomes dominant when we feel like we're under attack. So imagine your fight or flight reaction. Like if you happen to run across a bear, let's say it jumped out in front of you, and immediately you would have the reaction that you either wanted to fight, although hopefully not, or flee. And so the reptile brain is a part of the brain that's responsible for that. And this part of the brain is really guided by your instincts. And like I said, it becomes a driver when you feel like you're under threat. And so when the reptile brain is active, what it does is that it scans the environment for potential threats. Okay, so that is the reptile brain. Then we have the mammal brain, which is also known as the limbic system. And it is basically our emotional brain. And so this is the part of our brain that's associated with negative emotions that come instinctually, like anger or fear or anxiety. But it's also associated with positive emotions like love or curiosity or awe. And then finally, we have the angel brain, which is also the part of the brain that's called the neocortex. And so this is the part of our brain that's associated with problem solving, with making decisions, with planning, and with engaging in complex tasks. And so this is a part of the brain that really allows us to make decisions, to think about consequences, to have perspective. And so it's our higher level thought that occurs in this part of the brain. Okay, now think about a time when you're stressed. So when you're stressed, that means that you're perceiving some sort of a threat in the environment. And at that point, it's your reptile brain that tends to take control. And so that part of the brain is focused on taking action as opposed to thinking in a higher level way. And so that explains why when we feel threatened, we often engage in behaviors that we otherwise might not do, right? So, at those points, our neocortex is basically standing by quietly while our more primitive instincts to fight or to flee are running the show. And definitely the reptile brain has an important purpose, because if you think about it, if you were getting attacked by a bear, well, that's not the time to be pondering the meaning of life or writing poetry. That is the time to be taking action. But unfortunately, with the way that stress works, often we're perceiving immediate threats in our environment when there aren't any there. And so at that point, that's when having the reptile brain leading the show is not very adaptive or effective. So let's think of an example. So let's say that you're in a relationship with someone, whether it's a work relationship or perhaps a significant other, and maybe they do something that you perceive negatively. Maybe they say something to you and you take it the wrong way, or maybe they say something that you did take the right way, but it's a negative thing. And so immediately what happens is that you get a stress reaction going. Your reptile brain is running the show. And so you might start to feel anxious or maybe angry in response to what they've said to you. And as a result of that, you might find yourself saying something that maybe later on you wish you hadn't. And that would have been because your reptile brain had taken control and your neocortex was just sitting back, not thinking about the consequences, not thinking about the most appropriate thing to say in that circumstance. And so it's a challenge when we have those negative emotions because it causes our neocortex to take a back seat, or it can, unless we learn how to make that not happen. Now, if you look at the way that the brain is designed, it's kind of hardwired to give our emotions the upper hand. So think of your spinal cord that comes up, right? So the back of your neck. And so everything that you see or smell or hear or taste or touch comes to your brain in the form of electrical signals up the spinal cord. And basically what they're doing is they're passing on until they reach your brain. So they enter your brain through the spinal cord, right? And if you think about how the brain works, it passes through the limbic system, or the emotional part of your brain, your mammal brain, before they reach the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe, again, is where the angel brain is. And so basically, our brains are kind of hardwired to give our emotions first dibs on things. And that's why you frequently experience things emotionally before your sense of reason can kick in. And so it might sound like, based on what I'm saying, that we're all kind of slaves to our emotions and that there's no way to be able to step back from them. But obviously that's not true, because we know people who are able to do that. Maybe you're able to do it yourself sometimes. And why that is because luckily for us, EQ can be developed. And by increasing your self-awareness and learning to regulate your thoughts and your physiology, you can learn to be intentional about how you're relating to other people. And so some of the things that you can do are to learn specific behaviors, but there are some things that we're going to talk about too in terms of how you can manage your body in a way that's going to make it more likely that you can engage the angel part of your brain when you're interacting with others. There's also a process called neuroplasticity, and what that is it basically means that our brains can be rewired based on how we use them. And so what that means is that if across time you're intentional and you're practicing to respond in different ways in response to stimuli in the environment, then your brain is going to get more practiced in reacting in those constructive ways to things in the environment. And across time, what you're going to do is develop a less emotionally reactive brain. And so across time, it's going to become easier and easier to be smooth sailing in response to negative stimuli in the environment. Okay, so that's it for how emotions affect the brain. And in the next lesson, we're going to get into the meat of emotional intelligence, and we're going to focus on self-awareness. And in that lesson, I'm going to talk about what it is more specifically and how you can go about increasing it to have a higher EQ. So I will see you there. Up to this point, we've gone through some exercises designed to help you to become more self-aware. So you understand your strengths, your developmental opportunities, what you're like under stress, those kind of things. And you've also learned how to manage yourself a bit better, how to be aware of your emotions, calm your body down so your emotions don't trip you up, and how to even look back on mistakes and hopefully gain some greater insight into how to behave differently in the future. So now that you've got yourself under control, we're going to move on to the aspect of emotional intelligence called social awareness. And what that is the ability to accurately pick up on other people's emotions and understand what's going on with them. So you focused on yourself, and now we're going to focus on others. And so it's really the ability to be able to step back from your own emotions so that you can better recognize other people's points of view and see what's going on with them. And so I think a good example of thinking of this is it's kind of like you're an anthropologist. So you know, an anthropologist is a type of social scientist who studies people from other cultures and strives to be as objective as possible so that they can understand other people's conventions and how they interact with one another. And so I have this picture here of someone at a concert, because if you've ever gone to a concert, you can really kind of watch how people interact. And if you don't get caught up in the concert itself, which I probably don't recommend, because if you're at a concert, you're there because you like the artist and you want to get caught up in it. But if you ever want to, you can take a step back and watch what's going on. And if you ever watch what's happening with people at a concert or at a club, it can be really fascinating. You can see who's a little bit shy or who's really out there, more extroverted. You can see who's really into the music and who's on the stage. You can see who might be mad at their spouse. You can see who might be tired and wish that they weren't there at all, or someone who got maybe dragged there. So you could see all sorts of interpersonal behaviors. And if you start to just kind of do those sorts of things and observe and see what's going on with people, you can become more socially aware. And so to become more socially aware, you can kind of take on that role for yourself as an anthropologist, just trying to separate yourself from what's going on in the situation. And if you do that, you might find that you have a different perspective and that you notice what's going on with other people more. And that will help you to increase your social awareness. And so the lessons in this section of the course are going to be designed to increase your ability to be more socially aware and more astute at recognizing what's going on with the people around you. So for today, I want you to continue on to the next lesson, and then you'll have your first homework assignment for this area. So the first step in becoming more socially aware is really straightforward. It's simply starting to pay more attention to other people. And so as I mentioned in our overview of social awareness, one of the things that you really want to do is think of yourself as an anthropologist, watching what's going on. And so one of the things that you can do to become more socially aware is perhaps go to a mall or a coffee shop or even in your next meeting, and just be more intentional about watching the people in the room. So for example, for me, in the past week, I was at Starbucks and I was doing a little bit of work there. And as I sat there, I had the psychologist kind of
ability to be aware of, to understand and to appreciate the feelings and thoughts of others. Empathy is about tuning in. It's about being sensitive to what, how and why people feel and think the way that they do. Being empathetic means being able to emotionally read people. Empathetic people care about others. They show interest in them, and they show concern for them. It's about the ability to be non-judgmental. It's about the ability to put into words your understanding of other people's perspectives on the world, even if you don't agree with that perspective or find it a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit unusual. Being empathetic shifts a conflict relationship into more of a collaborative relationship. Empathy is not about being nice to others. It's simply a skill that allows you to see and experience the world from another person's viewpoint. Putting that understanding into words builds up relationships with other people. Completing this part of the course, you'll be able to define empathy, recognize the intelligence in empathy, describe the way the brain works and how it works with thinking and empathy, describe ways to demonstrate empathy, identify empathy through nonverbal signals and body language, explain the importance of listening in empathetic ways and how to develop your listening skills, and develop ways that you can increase your empathy. Empathy is your ability to recognize the concerns of other people and the ability to understand situations from their viewpoint and their perspective. Empathy also involves the ability to understand your own emotional range and responses, giving you the ability to understand the behaviours and actions of others and their emotional states. When you have empathy, you're able to appreciate the differences in other people's emotional responses and why they act in certain ways. Empathy doesn't just help in the regulation of emotions, it drives the fundamental way in which you integrate with other people and is involved in supporting the possibility of developing a range of different relationships. We're not born with empathy. It's not innate. Empathy has to be taught and modelled and learnt. We learn empathy through our relationships with our parents very early on in life. Empathetic concern is taught in early childhood. Modelling empathetic behaviours means that others are much more likely to adopt these behaviours themselves than when they're merely told to behave in a certain way. Reprimands such as, "Look at how sad you've made her feel," are far more helpful in developing empathy than being told, "That was naughty." How a person is feeling can be determined by looking at their behaviours and their actions. In stressful circumstances, 90% of the emotional level of communication is non-verbal. The rational, logical mind has a tendency to focus on the content of the actual words. However, emotions are expressed more readily in non-verbal signals. How often have you heard someone say that they feel fine, yet give the opposite message in their body language, their voice or their look? The ability to notice these emotional and rational signals is important in developing empathy. Subtle changes in non-verbal cues provide the empathetic observer with insights into subtle changes in emotion. Empathy is a fundamental component of both emotional and social intelligence, yet it's a highly misunderstood term. When people think of empathy, they often first think about sympathy and compassion. However, empathy is much broader in scope. Empathizing with another person isn't the same as sympathizing with them. They're two completely different capabilities. Sympathy is about taking pity or feeling sorry for someone else, whereas empathy is the act of listening and understanding feelings to take on the other person's perspective or viewpoint, what they see, what they feel, what they want, and working to truly try to understand their situation. Empathy involves deep, active listening, which goes way beyond hearing and understanding the words being used. It's a very difficult skill to master. If you have good empathy, you're able to read between the lines of dialogue and discern the person's motivation and focus. Subtle but reliable signals advertised on the face, in the eyes, with the posture and rhythms of speech signify what people are really thinking about when you're talking with them. Your natural impulse will be to consistently try to bring attention and recognition back to yourself. By overcoming this, you begin to develop clear, intuitive senses that support your ability to be empathetic. Empathy is about resisting these impulses and being able to sense and read the signals that people are sending in the course of an engagement or an interaction with you. Let's have a look in more detail at the difference between empathy and sympathy. It's important to be clear in your own mind about the definition of both and the difference between the two. Empathy is about accurately reading others' feelings. It's about respecting others' feelings while creating a solution where both parties gain. Sympathy, on the other hand, is an act of reacting to emotions to try to prevent and alleviate suffering. It's based upon pity. Sympathy is not necessarily concerned with how others are feeling. When you show sympathy, you take a position of superiority, and more often than not, you're trying to do something that will alleviate your own concerns and satisfy your own emotions. So sympathy is not necessarily concerned about how others are feeling, it's more about doing something that makes you feel better. Sympathy sets people apart, whereas empathy brings people together. The human brain is an amazing tool. It's one of the organs of the body and is the most complex instrument in the known universe. The other organs, such as the heart or the lungs, are not as sophisticated, and unlike these more simple organs that are capable of being transplanted from one person to another, the brain is so interwoven into the fabric of our bodies that we could refer to the body as being an organ of the brain, as opposed to being the other way round. An adult human's brain is about the size and weight of a melon. What makes the brain so remarkable is that it's made up of 86 billion neurons interconnected by 1.5 times 10 to the 14 synapses. These are the junctions between two nerve cells consisting of a minute gap across which impulse is passed by diffusion of a neurotransmitter. There are 4,500 neurotransmitters. Most people have heard of 2 or 3, such as dopamine and serotonin, but there are many, many more. This arrangement offers unlimited memory. The brain combines language and visual imagery operating by perception. It's capable of thinking about itself, which is what you're doing right now, and it's capable of working with emotions. The brain is made up of several distinct regions. Each of these regions serves 2 functions: physiological and psychological. Each region has a different purpose, but they all connect to give us our feelings, thoughts and actions. Biologically, each region plays a role in managing aspects of our physiology, from regulating oxygen levels in the blood to sending messages to the muscles that enable us to move. Each region possesses a distinct psychological function for the way in which it processes information. When considering the psychological function of the human brain, it's possible to divide it into the following areas. The primitive brain, or the reptilian brain, controls functions basic to survival, such as heart rate, breathing, digesting food, and sleeping. It's the lowest, most primitive area of the human brain, and it includes the cerebellum, which is involved in coordinating movement. Although we're not consciously aware of the information processed by our lower brain, it receives information from the senses and provides us with our instincts or our gut feelings. The term the emotional brain is used to describe the collective areas that make up the limbic system, and this includes the amygdala. These are the brain structures that filter and process emotions and emotional responses. This region is important because it plays a lead role in governing emotions and our natural and automatic behaviours and functions. The outer cortex forms the rest of the brain. The rational brain is made up of the frontal lobes or prefrontal cortex, as this region is more precisely known. This area of the brain enables us to reason, to be rational, to be objective, and to master our instincts and our emotions. The left hemisphere of the cortex is where we store the rules by which we live our lives. For example, the rules of language are stored in this area of the brain, which is why people who suffer from strokes within the left hemisphere often find speaking difficult. Being more structured and rule-based, the left hemisphere processes information sequentially, with each step being a consequence of the previous one. The right hemisphere of the cortex, in stark contrast, deals with pattern making. It deals with ambiguity and new learning. The right hemisphere, therefore, processes information in a more irrational style by looking at the linkages, patterns, and associations with other memories and stored experiences. The brain is capable of multitasking, using both hemispheres simultaneously. It's able to process information very quickly and intuitively, and it's able to adapt to circumstances when needed. However, it's not perfect. The brain is limited to some degree. It makes mistakes without care, and it's influenced by outside sources. To work effectively, the human brain consumes vast amounts of glucose, energy. It consumes about 20% of the body's energy. So, if it doesn't have to work hard, it won't. This means that it wants to make the quickest decisions possible, and will often jump to conclusions, make snap decisions and judgments without all the information available. So belief in your brain giving you an accurate representation of reality and a deep understanding of circumstances can often get you into trouble. That's your best friend and your worst enemy, your own brain. Fred Durst. Neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system and covers many disciplines. As human beings, we are complex organisms with our brain connected to intricate neural circuits and biological systems. The nervous system is the most complex organ system in the body, with most of the complexity residing in the brain. At its simplest level, cognitive and behavioral neuroscience looks at how the workings of the brain address complex questions about its interactions with the environment. Neuroscience addresses what's happening in our brain around how we think about experiences and interactions with others. Understanding how we create thoughts and how brain and neural pathways develop can provide insights to explain how we deal with certain situations consciously and unconsciously. Learning how to change habits and rewire our thinking can be a valuable tool to creating greater flexibility and new approaches to challenging situations. Your brain has a powerful ability to put together and make sense of whatever is put before it. Neural networks in your brain behave as a self-organizing system that encourages incoming information to organize itself into stable patterns so that you can make sense of the world. This patterning action forms the basis of your perception. Your attention will attribute relevance, understanding and meaning when information can be sorted and stored, ideally when existing patterns are triggered. The thinking and language systems that we developed as humans are good at logic, but poor at perception. This gives rise to some inadequacies and dangers in our current thinking. Language is our main instrument of communication and thinking. The excellence of language as a descriptive medium makes it relatively crude as a device for perception. Complex situations can be described, but we've not needed to enrich our patterns of perception through language. This is why we resort to storytelling and describing events and circumstances using metaphors and similes. Language creates mutually exclusive categories such as right and wrong, good and bad, friend and enemy, and so on. These categories allow the logic of contradiction. However, the logic of perception has been overlooked until recently. Principles, logic and argument form the basis for much of your thinking. The way that critical thinking has become considered to be the highest form of thinking has some unfortunate consequences. This traditional way of thinking is based around what is held to be true and what could only be checked by logical argument. What limits your thinking, and in particular critical thinking, is the assumption that your perceptions and your values are common and universal. A high proportion of politicians and those in the legal and medical professions are only accustomed to this way of thinking through the way in which they've been trained. The result is a strong tendency towards disagreeing and attacking. When they have low levels of emotional and social intelligence, such that a person or their character are criticised rather than the belief, this behaviour can be interpreted as argumentative and disrespectful. Critical thinking lacks the productive, generative, creative and design elements of lateral thinking that are often needed to tackle problems and find a way forward. According to Dr. Edward de Bono, the leading authority in the field of creative thinking, every valuable creative idea must always be logical in hindsight. If this wasn't the case, the value of the idea wouldn't be recognised and it would only seem like a crazy idea. It's now known that an idea, obvious in hindsight, may be invisible in foresight. Humour helps us to understand perception better as it gives direct insights into changes in perception, followed by changes in emotion, which can't be achieved by logic alone. Empathy doesn't come naturally. You had to learn empathy by being taught it through the relationships that you had with your parents or carers in childhood, and the manner in which they demonstrated empathetic behaviours. Empathy is nurtured very early on in life. Nature gives the mother, through her physiological changes and her maternal instinct, the ability to support her child's empathetic development. A very young child learns to recognise and show preference for its mother's voice and can understand and react to her emotional state. Imitation helps to create the child-parent bond in the first few critical months. From this basis, emotions are recognized and learnt, which automatically signals the child's emotional circuits. These circuits are strengthened further through engagement with others and their emotional expression by the modelling of empathetic behaviours. Imitation becomes a complex, subtle, and often unconscious process, an automatic part of social functioning. Your mental representation of the world was formed through those early relationships, becoming quite an influential force in the development of your empathetic behaviour and the way in which you regulate emotions. As a human being, you're a social animal and are hardwired to connect. Through empathy, you learnt how to integrate into social groups, those of your family, your friends and other people. This learnt empathy then becomes a continuous automatic process. When you model empathetic behaviours, others are more likely to adopt these behaviours themselves. This can become quite an influential force in the regulation of emotions and in building relationships throughout life. Empathy, involving the sensing of another person's feelings, allows for rapport. Empathy is an individual ability, one that resides in each person, but rapport can only arise between people as they interact. Rapport evolves and becomes more prominent through the course of their interactions. Two or more independent brains don't necessarily react consciously or unconsciously to each other, but the individual minds become, in a sense, fused into a single system. When you create rapport, the system of brain interconnectedness relies upon specific neural circuitry and related endocrine systems which inspire others to engage with you. Your brain contains neurons that are important in empathy by helping to create an instant sense of shared experience. There are 3 types of neurons specifically engaged in empathy. Mirror neurons, which mirror and mimic what another person does and feels. Oscillators, which coordinate you physically with another person by regulating when and how your body moves, and so tune in to the other person, creating an unconscious feeling of resonance. Spindle cells, which are involved in your intuition and rapidly access your judgments and beliefs about whether to trust the other person in conjunction with other intuitive measures. This interface of minds is a stabilizing mechanism from outside both of you and emerges as you interact together. The way that this interconnectedness works means that you can't be emotionally stable on your own. It's not that you should or shouldn't be stable by yourself, but without the stabilizing effect of the interface, you can't be. The deep consequence of this is that through the sum total of our interactions, we create each other. When you demonstrate good levels of empathy, you're able to read other people's emotions, their moods, and interpret their nonverbal signals quite accurately. You have respect, so you're able to relate well to people from a variety of diverse backgrounds. This is because you're open-minded enough to try and understand things from their perspective, from their viewpoint. You ask appropriate questions and listen, listening attentively to their answers. By listening, you will gain more information and more detail that you need in order to understand their viewpoint and their perspective, particularly when they're very different from your own. You don't have to agree with somebody's differences in opinion, you're just trying to understand it. You're also able to understand the reason for their actions, not only how they're reacting, but why they react in the way that they do. It would be a lot easier to be aware of other people's emotions if they would simply tell us how they felt. But since most people don't, you've got to resort to asking questions, reading between the lines, guessing and trying to interpret nonverbal cues. How a person is feeling can be determined by considering their behaviours or their actions. Emotionally expressive people are the easiest to read because their eyes and their faces are constantly letting you know how they're feeling. People with good empathy are able to pick up on these subtle cues through the nonverbal signals from all types of people. They appreciate not only what is being said, but why it's being said by picking up on these clues and working with them. Nonverbal signals include the size and number of gestures by considering whether the gestures are large and expansive, and many of them, or whether they're small and contained, and there are few of them. Large gestures and a lot of them tend to indicate energy and enthusiasm. Smaller and fewer gestures tend to indicate a lower level of energy. Doesn't mean to say that the passion isn't there, it's just that it's better controlled and the focus is slightly different. Considering body movement will give some further clues. Is it fluid and relaxed, so that it's more focused on helping people to engage at a more personal level, or is it formal and stiff, indicating a degree of seriousness? This links into posture. An informal, fluid and relaxed posture helps to put people at ease, whereas a stiff, upright and formal posture again indicates a level of seriousness, an interest in working with tasks rather than with people, and a level of control. Emotions can be expressed readily on the face, as I've already said, and by picking up on facial expressions, you're going to learn a lot which will help you with your empathy. A person who gives away a lot of information around their emotions on their face by smiling or frowning whenever they're experiencing an emotion are easier to read. Some people tend to keep their emotions in check, and their facial expressions show a lot of control. Eye contact will give you some clues. Eye contact can be empathetic and fluid and relaxed, which is intended to put you at your ease and engage with the person at a deeper level. The eye contact could be very fixed, to try to ensure that you understand what is being said. The tone of voice will give you some clues as well, according to the rhythm and the timbre that the person uses when they speak. Associated with this is the volume of speech. It can be loud or it can be soft. Another factor is the pace of speech, and this will give you some clues. Do they speak very quickly, with certainty and assertiveness, or do they speak very slowly in a deliberate manner to ensure that they get their point put across in an appropriate way? Interestingly, this links into how they're listening and how you're listening. When we listen to the tone and look out for the body language, we learn far more. In a test, when the instructor says a single word, for example, maybe thanks, terrible, with different voice tones and body language, it was found that the impact on the audience was 7% for the word, 38% for the tone, and 55% for body language. So you can see how the tone and the body language become quite important in these situations. As words become sentences, paragraphs and speeches, the influence of the words grow relative to the others. Nevertheless, non-verbal elements still play an important role, and learning to interpret these and the information behind them will help you in terms of developing your empathy. Certain clues around a person's behavioural style and their focus can be determined within any interactions when emotions are relatively stable. The clues can be determined looking at the way in which the person is using their assertiveness and how they work to control their emotional expression. Non-verbal signals can be clustered together, and these are going to give you some clues, some interesting insights into people's assertiveness and the way in which they express their emotions. This will help you in determining their primary focus through the way in which they interact with you. Assertiveness is the way people go about influencing others and the extent to which they perceive these behaviours are influencing them. People who are more assertive, who have a way of influencing that is more obvious to others through their opinions and by issuing instructions, by telling people what they think and what they want. Their non-verbal signals include using lots of gestures, doing so in a fast way. They have an intense eye contact. They speak in a loud, quick manner, and they will offer opinions, whether people want them or not. People who are more responsive ask more questions and influence others by responding to their requests. Their non-verbal signals include fewer gestures, slower body movements. Their voice is a lot quieter and measured, and they tend to be good at listening. Let's consider how emotions can be expressed. Emotions can be expressed freely when dealing with others, or they can be controlled. People who openly externalize their feelings show non-verbal signals which include large gestures. They'll show their emotions readily on their face in expressive ways. They have an open body posture, a short, empathetic duration of eye contact. There's an inflection in their voice and they're fairly informal. People who keep their emotions in check and internalize their feelings show non-verbal signals that include smaller gestures. They tend not to show their emotions on their face. They have a closed body posture, a longer duration of eye contact which can be quite intense at times. There will be a monotone in their voice, and they're fairly formal. Combining the way that people use assertiveness and emotional expression gives 4 primary sources of focus. You can assess these by considering the range of non-verbal signals that are clustered together that you experience during a normal interaction. The 4 focuses are a focus on goals and outcomes, a focus on creativity and trying new things or doing things in new ways, a focus on being friendly and being liked and building relationships, or a focus on doing things perfectly and in the right way. These non-verbal signals are going to become intensified and will change in emotionally charged engagements. In these situations, the non-verbal expressions become more intense and more obvious. Beyond that, they will change, and they become less reliable in providing you with a source of information that you can use to determine their assertiveness and the way in which they work with their emotions, because these will change, and they will change quite dramatically. But in normal circumstances, they can be a very reliable way of engaging with people, of interpreting their intention, their interests and their focus, and engaging with them at a deeper level. The Russian film director Lev Kuleshov made his first film at the age of 19 and became a powerful figure in the Soviet film industry. He also made an astonishing psychological discovery. He intercut shots of Ivan Moshukin, a Russian silent film star, with 3 images: a bowl of soup, a child in an open coffin, and a glamorous young woman reclining on a divan. People were impressed by Moshukin's subtle acting, showing hunger, grief and lust. But Moshukin's acting wasn't so subtle as non-existent. As you can see, the very same shot was used in each case. Showing the relatively impassive face with scenes laden with emotion causes people to impose their own interpretations on Moshukin's emotional state. The Kuleshov effect is now widely used in cinema and is highly influential. The background of a still photograph can dramatically change how a face is read emotionally. Context turns out to be far more important than we imagined. Consider this photo of a woman. When you look at it alone, it can appear to be open to one interpretation by what we're seeing on her face. In this case, you're probably seeing anger and frustration. However, if we change the context, this can change. In the context of a crowd of supporters, she looks happy or even triumphant. The general principle here is that your brain interprets each piece of perceptual input to make as much sense as possible in light of the wider context. Sometimes it's not that easy to accurately pick up on the emotional state of another person through their facial expressions alone. Here is an interesting optical illusion that demonstrates this. Look at these images. Get up from your seat and move back about 3 or 4 meters. What you'll notice in this optical illusion is that the faces appear to swap emotions, so that the neutral face appears angry and the angry face appears neutral. What is the emotional state of this person? It's difficult to determine. Some people have a particular syndrome. It's called Mobius syndrome. It's a rare genetic disorder, and this means that they have a mask-like expression. This is due to palsies of the cranial nerves. Also, people who've had too many Botox injections have a mask-like expression, and they are constantly showing happiness. In all of these examples, it's dangerous to make assumptions about a person's emotional state based purely on what you see on their face. Other expressions of underlying motion have to be reviewed. There isn't a distinct pattern of emotion that can be mapped in the brain, as they're not that distinct and they appear to vary from individual to individual. Not everyone smiles when they're happy or scowls when they're angry. They emerge from the physical properties of your body, how your brain is wired through development, and your culture and upbringing. They're not experienced and expressed universally. It's recently been suggested that emotions are cultural. Cultural display rules dictate which emotions are displayed and considered acceptable, and these guide how they're experienced. Some languages have labels for emotions that are not labelled in other languages. For example, Tahitians don't have a word for sadness. Does this mean that they don't experience this emotion? This is an interesting area of current debate and investigation. The German word Schadenfreude indicates joy at someone else's misfortune. It has no equivalent in English. The skill around understanding emotions in others is to ask them what they're feeling and what it means to them, and to do this without prejudice or judgment. The learning point from all of this is not to make snap judgments on the basis of limited information. Keep an open mind and look for more evidence that will support or contradict your initial interpretation. To influence or persuade another person to change their mind or to behave in a different manner, you need to start from where they are. You need to start to understand how they're seeing and perceiving the situation around them. What may be important to you may not matter to them. If they don't think the message is relevant to what they feel is important, they won't be interested. When people feel that their viewpoint is under attack, they dig in, harden their attitude and resist. This is particularly true if they're unaware of how your viewpoint differs from theirs, and are not given good reason to see things differently. The very existence of their reality is under threat, and their primary objective will not be to change their mind. To get the person into rapport with you, it's about removing obstacles to communication, taking things at a pace that works for them, and using verbal and body language that they find appealing and makes sense to them. This gives them the chance to start finding their way from where they are to where you would like them to be. If resistance is encountered through lack of rapport, the first thing to do is to pay more attention. It doesn't mean giving up your viewpoint and accepting theirs as true. It just means respecting their reality and working with it. These behaviours can easily kill rapport. Being late. This indicates that you are doing something that you consider to be more important. Avoiding eye contact and cues around appropriate levels of social conversation, which creates suspicion and may indicate that you want to get the meeting over and done with as quickly as possible. Being unprepared. This may come across as chaotic and suggests that you don't care enough about the other person to have made any effort to prepare. Teaching and telling using science and jargon, which suggests that you may be trying too hard to impress and demonstrate how capable you are, or it can come across as being condescending, focusing on your needs and ignoring theirs or their key points of interest. Forcing your agenda indicates that you have little interest in theirs. Talking too much. This suggests that you're not listening. Focusing only on the problems and issues faced by the other person without giving any attention to their positive achievements. Here are some behaviours that can help you to build rapport. Use eye contact and smile. For the other person, it means that you're connecting, building trust, and makes them feel comfortable. Show high levels of attention and genuine interest. Everyone likes to feel that attention is being paid to them. This increases the other person's level of attention and increases your influence. Use their first name, as it shows that you identify with the other person, but be careful and don't use it too often. Ask for help when needed. For example, can you help me to understand the main issues within your industry? Can you help me to understand the main issues within your company, as I'm not as familiar with these as you are? This offers a partnership approach where you're using each other's expertise appropriately, and so the other person feels validated. Match their energy, pace, speech patterns and body language so that the other person feels on the same level as you and understands and follows what you're saying. Use well-phrased questions to show that you genuinely and empathetically want to understand their point of view, and show appreciation so that the other person feels validated. Quite clearly, listening has become known as a difficult skill to practice. It is challenging today for people to listen completely to what other people are saying. The situation has been aggravated with our modern lifestyle and how people use devices at work and otherwise. Smartphones and tablets assure that unattended communication follows you all the time. The notifications draw out your attention, and considerable emotional control is needed to be able to focus on the matter at hand. The ability to communicate anytime and anywhere has come with a price. Whilst gadgets might be a contributor, they've amplified what is a human weakness. We have difficulty focusing on the present moment. There's a constant urge to find the next thing to do while listening, formulating a reply, interjecting with opinions, or digressing to something totally different. In recognizing the problem of not listening appropriately, it's important to understand that listening inadequately has its consequences. To the person at the other end of the conversation, not listening conveys a number of the following: a lack of interest in the conversation, a lack of respect for the person who's speaking. It suggests that the listener has more important things to do. It introduces discomfort on whether the message is understood and will be acted upon. It induces self-doubt in the speaker, especially in a reporting relationship. There are other possible consequences which are detrimental to the intent of the conversation: a strain on the working relationship, a delay in decisions, introducing incorrect decisions, a trigger to rework and reduce productivity, hampering teamwork and collaboration. In terms of doing something about it, whilst there are those who've come to accept that distracted conversations are part of the new normal, there's also a recognition amongst most people that this is a problem. In the case of meetings, setting ground rules helps. However, there are certainly ways to ensure that conversations are more fruitful and rewarding. The art of conversation lies in listening. The following 6 simple guidelines can lead to better conversations. Number 1. Resist distractions. Any distractions which prompts the listener to look away from the speaker is going to cause trouble. Set devices to silent to avoid interruptions. Number 2. Immerse yourself in the conversation. Reflect and engage deeply in the topic. You may know a lot about the topic, or maybe not enough. Both scenarios offer potential to either enhance the conversation or to learn more. Number 3. Focus on purpose. At times you lose the intent with which you're having the conversation as it progresses. Bring your focus back to the purpose of the conversation. Number 4. Delve deeper. Shallow conversations don't bring any benefits. They don't uncover issues or provide learning. Conversations which are deeper are also more mentally stimulating and satisfying. Number 5. Build awareness. All skills need practice, and listening is one of those. Mindfulness practices such as meditation can go a long way in building present moment awareness, training the mind to stick to the present rather than leaping to the past or the future. And finally, number 6. Express respect and gratitude. Approach the conversation by expressing respect and gratitude for the other person, for information and knowledge shared, time invested and interest shown. The approach to a conversation is a choice, irrespective of the environment that we're in. Practicing these simple guidelines will not only lead to better conversations, they will help you to create greater empathy and improve your art of listening. Listening is a critical component of empathy. It's often talked about, but to truly listen to someone with empathy is not easy. Empathetic listening, also often referred to as active listening, can be enhanced by a trusting environment, one where both parties feel comfortable, safe, and with no distractions. Acknowledge the speaker by turning towards them and looking directly at them. Take in any information that they're telling you objectively and without judgment or without any comments. Actively attempt to understand the other person's point of view by asking encouraging, open questions and repeating back exactly what you've heard. Model empathetic practices. Look at the speaker and try to maintain rapport. Allow the speaker to share their problems with you. and allow them to show and share emotions. Create a positive, supportive atmosphere. Listening is avoiding anything that could take your attention away from the other person. Be attentive. Give the other person 100% of your time and attention with no distractions. Be interested in the other person. Be interested in what they're talking about or what they have to say. Be interested in how they're feeling and how they're showing this to you and how they're expressing themselves. Be alert to them and to them alone. Allow the other person to come up with their own ideas and talk about these in detail. Be a sounding board for them. Indicate to them that you're listening. Show concern. Ask them for details, for examples, and for clarification. Ask questions or make short statements that continue the conversation. That's interesting. Tell me more. Reflect back what you've heard. Make sure that you really understand what's being said. Here are some things to avoid when listening empathetically and actively. Avoid interrupting to allow the speaker the free flow of their dialogue so that they can put their thoughts over to you in their own way and in their own time and in the way in which they feel is most appropriate. This may be uncomfortable for you at times, especially if there are long drawn-out pauses. Avoid asking too many questions, particularly closed questions. Questions that could be answered with a simple statement or a yes or a no, as this may feel to them like they're being interrogated. Try not to give advice. When you're giving advice, you're not listening. Don't change the subject. If the topic is of importance to the other person, you'll be denying them the chance for them to talk about it if you try to move on to talk about something else. How they're engaging with their emotions is of vital importance, so allow them to express themselves and share their emotions so that you can understand exactly how they feel. Try not to get pulled into an emotional exchange by showing any of your intense emotion, particularly if they cause the other person to react in a negative way. Whilst listening is a core component of empathy and building rapport, you don't need to possess a psychologist's listening aptitude to develop listening skills. If you don't possess a natural aptitude for listening, you have to work at demonstrating and developing the skill. You're going to be less effective at listening if you carry out other tasks or concentrate on something else while the other person is talking. If you're thinking of how to respond rather than tuning into the speaker and what they're saying. If you're listening out for comments that will act as an introduction to what it is that you want to say. If you interrupt or talk over the speaker. If you get ahead of the conversation and finish the speaker's sentences for them. If you're looking for opportunities to add witty comments, stories and opinions at the expense of the other person's story. If you focus more on facts than feelings. If you're obsessed with details so that you miss the point of what the speaker is trying to say. If you forget what you've talked about on previous occasions, or, even worse, earlier on in the conversation. If you're not in control of any of your nervous or uptight body language signals. If you hint at any disapproval or impatience with your tone and or body language. Who doesn't occasionally cross these boundaries of poor listening? Tight schedules, demanding goals, and people that try your patience can combine to take you away from listening effectively. Working on listening more effectively is a start to becoming more emotionally and socially intelligent, and helps to develop leadership and coaching skills. To develop key listening skills, face the speaker and maintain eye contact. Be attentive but be relaxed. Keep an open mind by listening without any judgment. Be curious about what you're hearing. Listen to the words and try to picture what the speaker is saying. Don't try to come up with any solutions. Wait for the speaker to pause and then ask clarifying questions. Ask questions only to ensure understanding and develop their thinking. If you follow that through, how would that affect? Try to feel what the speaker is feeling. Give the speaker encouragement to continue and reflect back the speaker's feelings. You must be really pleased. I can see that you must be confused. The feeling I'm getting is... Check your understanding by summarising what it is that you've heard. So, what you're saying is... Pay attention to what isn't being said, to non-verbal cues. Effective listening requires a lot of deliberate effort and a keen mind. Everyone likes to be listened to and to be understood. It affirms and validates us as human beings. People who provide you with opportunities to be heard and the time to listen to you are rewarded with your trust and loyalty. Active, empathetic listening affects the communication process. Done well, it builds rapport, checks understanding, shows understanding, enables hearing, makes the other person feel good, encourages others to open up, encourages others to listen to us. Active, empathetic listening promotes good relationships, provides a flow of new ideas and information, keeps you updated with regard to any changes and implementations, encourages participation, and ensures that situations don't turn into crises. Most people don't listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. Stephen R. Covey. Here are a range of techniques that you can use to understand and develop empathy. First and foremost, and most fundamental, get to understand your own emotions. To increase your empathy, you need to start with yourself. Pay close attention to your feelings and your emotional state. Try to identify and recognize and understand these feelings. Note what situations change your emotions. What gives rise to emotions that you like? What gives rise to emotions that you don't like? Use this knowledge to understand how you respond emotionally, and use this knowledge to understand how others are likely to respond emotionally. Interact with a wide range of people. Look for opportunities to get to mix with and get to know people of different ages, different ethnicities, different lifestyle choices, different socio-economic backgrounds, and different levels of physical and mental ability. The more types of people that you know, and the more types of people that you interact with, the more experiences you'll have to draw on as you work to increase your empathy. Seek out similarities between yourself and others. When you stress difference between yourself and other people, the harder it is to understand others. Seek out those areas of shared interest, of common purpose or similarities with people that you don't like or that you disagree with. Practice taking on another person's perspective. Train your mind to be open to views and ideas other than your own. Try to immerse yourself in different perspectives to get a better understanding of the issues. This can be done on a personal level. It doesn't have to be done on a political or a moral level. Examine the lives, the works of famous empathetic people. It's easier to become empathetic when you have good role models. Choose people deeply involved in a social cause that you respect and read their biography to gain a better understanding of how they use their empathy. Read good fiction and poetry and listen to a wide variety of musical styles. Fiction generally contains accounts of how specific individuals react to circumstances and situations. This can be emotionally evocative when viewed from their perspective, and it will help you to gain an understanding of different people's internal states. Try to experience the emotions contained within poetry, to experience how emotions are created with words through metaphors and similes. Try to experience the emotions contained within music. These are a range of tips and techniques that you can use to develop empathy, and I'm sure you'll come across many others. By now you'll be able to clearly define empathy and have a clear understanding of what empathy is all about. You'll be able to recognise the intelligence in empathy and understand the difference between empathy and sympathy. You'll be able to describe the way the brain works and how it works with thinking and empathy. You'll be able to describe ways to demonstrate empathy. You'll be able to identify empathy through non-verbal signals and body language. You'll be able to explain the importance of listening in empathy and how to develop your listening skills. And you'll be able to develop ways that you can increase your empathy. The practical activity will help you to further identify empathy through non-verbal signals and body language. It gets you to review and reflect on a number of different emotions and look at ways in which they're expressed by considering the posture, the gestures, the tone of voice, and the way in which the emotion is expressed on the face. This will give you a chance to build up your understanding of how other people are expressing their emotions, what you will experience, and what you will see. And this will help you in terms of developing your own levels of empathy. I hope you enjoy the practical activity. I hope you've enjoyed these video lessons, and you now feel a lot more confident in working with and using empathy. Within this module, we'll investigate different behavioural preferences and how they're expressed. We're going to explore different social styles. This will give you some insights into the different communication styles and how the behaviours play out and how they work together specifically when you're looking at interacting with other people, building up relationships. I'll introduce you to a behavioural model that I've been using for over 20 years. And have found it very useful for helping people to understand each other, whether they're working with people individually, in small groups or in large teams. It's a very useful communication tool when you're working with other people. By completing this module, you'll be able to list the 4 social styles, and you'll be able to recognise the strengths and limitations of each social style, with some hints and tips, some do's and don'ts when you're interacting with each style. You'll be able to match some of the expressed behaviours of their style to their work-based preferences, which will help you to identify ways that you can adapt your behaviour to collaborate and work together more effectively, and so build up more satisfying relationships, doing this in an authentic manner. Your understanding of social styles will help you to get the outcomes that you're looking for when you're working with different people, and help you with your interpersonal relationships both inside and outside of work. I'm a member of a dysfunctional team, and I do not accept that the people I work with care about my success and happiness, and I refuse to believe I can change. I realise this may come as a bit of a surprise, but together each achieves more is simply not true. People work here just for the money. Everyone knows my priorities. My own personal success is more important than my team's success. I feel that my co-workers are more likely to stab me in the back than watch my back. I don't think that my fellow workers will say only good things about me when I'm not present. In the future, I anticipate that I'll receive more information through the grapevine than proper channels. I don't believe that every interaction will embody trust, collaboration, openness and candour. Not in my workplace. Negativity and lack of enthusiasm will be rampant. Respect will be minimal. Blaming and finger-pointing, which will take precedence over accountability, will impact results and the overall work environment. I envisage that there's no hope for me, my team and my organisation unless we take active steps to reverse it. Unless we take active steps to reverse it, there is no hope for me, my team and my organisation. I envisage that the overall work environment will impact results and accountability will take precedence over blaming and finger-pointing, which will be minimal. Respect will be rampant. Negativity and lack of enthusiasm, not in my workplace. Trust, collaboration, openness and candour will embody every interaction. I don't believe that I'll receive more information through the grapevine than proper channels. I anticipate that in the future my fellow workers will say only good things about me when I'm not present. I don't think that my co-workers are more likely to stab me in the back than watch my back. I feel that my team's success is more important than my own personal success. Everyone knows my priorities. People work here just for the money is simply not true. Together, each achieves more. I realise this may come as a bit of a surprise, but I can change. The people I work with care about my success and happiness, and I refuse to believe, and I do not accept, that I'm a member of a dysfunctional team. My attitude is tied up in the way in which I think and feel about myself, the way I think and feel about you, and it's also the way in which I think and feel about the team that we're in. My attitude is also tied up in the way in which I think and feel about the environments that we're operating in. My attitude drives my behaviour. It's what you see and what you react to. It's a preference. It's a particular style, and it drives the way in which we interact together. My behaviour will influence the way in which you think and feel about me. It will also influence the way in which you're thinking and feeling about yourself, the team and the environment. Your attitude then drives your behaviour. That's what I see of you, and that's what I interact with. So, your behaviour will then drive and influence my attitude. If I have a good attitude, it means that I will then change my behaviour in a good way, so that we have a positive interaction and we enjoy working together. This will influence good behaviour and attitude in you, which will further drive good behaviours and attitude in me. However, if I have a bad attitude, my behaviour is likely to be less than positive, which will have an influence on your behaviour and your attitude. So the combination of your behaviour and your attitude will not necessarily be as positive as it could be. This will result in a negative downward spiral of the way in which we're interacting. The most important component of good interactions is communication. To have good communication, we need to build rapport. So I need to tune my senses into you in such a way that we can build up that rapport. So that I'm picking up on all your body language, the way in which you're using your voice, and the way in which you're expressing yourself. The important thing for me to do is to change my behaviour, flex my behaviour to reflect who you are, what you are, and the way in which you're behaving. So I need to be able to identify certain components of the way in which you're behaving. More often than not, I'm doing this intuitively. I'm doing it unconsciously. But then I need to have the capability to be able to adapt. And also I need to have the right attitude in order to adapt, so that we can, between us, build up a good, healthy working relationship. The only way to change someone's mind is to connect with them from the heart. Rashid Ogunlaru. Both emotional and social intelligence are underpinned by self-awareness. Social interaction styles consider your preferred pattern of behaviour for a large number of situations. Your interaction style represents itself through your daily interactions, and it's not subject to judgment or evaluation, it's merely your acquired preference. At a surface level, your style is closely linked to whether you tend to assert yourself or respond to others in social settings, and whether you tend to display emotion or secure control in group settings. It shows itself in your communication style, conflict management style, the job roles you're drawn to, and the way you perceive yourself and your contributions in the workplace. The underlying model of social interaction styles involves two primary dimensions. Assertiveness. You may prefer to take the lead in assertive ways, speaking directly and frankly, while focusing on strategic objectives. Alternatively, you may prefer to respond to input from others and sharing your own ideas as a way to build upon others. Emotional control. You may prefer to express yourself outwardly in social settings or to maintain composure and control. The two extremes of the assertive and emotional variables provide four basic combinations that can be thought of as behavioural preferences across a range of situations. Some people blend these four patterns almost equally, while others may tend to prefer one behavioural pattern over others. Years of research into workplace success have shown that you have one of four social interaction styles. Each style has its own preferred way of acting, thinking, and making decisions. Understanding these preferences allows you to determine the best way to interact with anyone. Driver-style people control their emotions and speak assertively. They prefer to be decisive and control a situation. Their focus is on outcomes and results. They're not concerned about relationships or feelings and may come across as blunt at times. Expressive style people show their emotions readily and speak openly. They are optimistic and creative and enjoy sharing their ideas. They may appear to others as unfocused and easily distracted. Amiable style people show their emotions openly and prefer to ask questions rather than give orders. Relationships, feelings, and personal security are important to them. As they want the time to consider the impact of decisions on everyone, they may appear hesitant at times. Analytical style people control their emotions but tend to ask questions rather than give orders. They're focused on logic and accuracy, and they act deliberately to achieve that end. At times, their focus on getting things perfect may be perceived as being critical. Focus and pace. The expressive and amiable styles display emotions openly and respond best to those who do the same. Their focus in achieving an outcome is through relationships. As their tendency is to readily show emotion, This helps them to build relationships at work, but it can have mixed effects on team cohesiveness. The driver and analytical styles tend to view displays of emotion as not being necessarily relevant in the workplace. These styles are more focused on the task itself. Both of these styles care about personal relationships and feelings, but consider these to be relevant only in certain settings, preferring to express themselves more rationally at work. The expressive and driver styles will put more energy into situations and what they're trying to achieve, and operate at a faster pace. The analytical and amiable styles have a tendency to conserve their energy, and as a consequence are more deliberate in the way in which they go about things, and so are slower paced. The circle in the centre of the graph shows where emotionally intelligent and socially intelligent engagements take place. Here the focus and pace of the interaction is more in harmony with others involved, and can be adapted easily to take account of their responses. Driver-style people have the strength of will to work well under pressure, and are always ready to take on responsibility. They have a clear idea of their ambitions and goals, as well as the directness and forcefulness to achieve those goals. It also means that they will have a competitive attitude and will generally follow their own ideas rather than work cooperatively with others. The driver style is often a useful trait in a manager or leader, especially in situations where there's a need for decisive action and clear direction. Note that this certainly doesn't mean that someone with a driver style will be an effective leader. That depends to a huge degree on the situation, but the core features of this style tend to match well with the challenges of leadership. You will have difficulty with the driver style if you waste their time, are unclear and use too many words of explanation, get too personal or try to chat too much, are disorganised, stray from the purpose of the meeting, ask irrelevant questions, make wild claims, try to control the meeting. You should aim to get down to business quickly, be specific in questioning, use time efficiently, provide alternatives for them to choose from, be factual and to the point, talk about results and outcomes, avoid too much detail, when finished, go. The manner of the driver style is confident and controlling. They can have a confrontational and abrupt manner. They may frequently interrupt, make efforts to control outcomes, and take direct action. Their facial expressions are limited and controlled. Their eye contact is of long duration and direct. Their gaze is fixed and intense. Their body movement is upright with a thrusting posture. Short, sharp gestures are frequently used and confined to driving home the points that they're making. Their voice is loud, clear, quick, clipped and determined. The conversational flow is pushing towards getting things done quickly and effectively. They're motivated by power and authority. Their basic fear is failure. Their valued words are results, highly competitive, customized solution, research, innovative, unique, efficient, expedient. The stress response of the driver is autocratic. They tell people what to do. Expressive style people are at their most comfortable in a social situation and interact with others in open and expressive ways. They're active in their approach and orientated towards other people. This is the root of their socially confident and unreserved attitude. They thrive on the attention and approval of other people, and are more motivated by praise and appreciation than most other styles. Despite their outgoing attitude, they are often unwilling to risk causing offence, so they will try to avoid doing anything or saying anything that will upset another person. If they do cause an intense emotional response, they will work to reassure the other person and not to escalate any conflict. The expressive style will be at their most motivated, surrounded by other people, and with the scope to communicate freely. You will have difficulty with the expressive style if you socialize too much, control the meeting and keep strictly to a structure, are impatient or controlling, input too much detail, take away their freedom to choose and then close down the conversation, patronize or remain determined that your way is the only way. You should aim to expect some elements of socializing. Talk about opinions and other people. Give your ideas about the product or service that you're talking about. Be enthusiastic and energetic. Be fast-paced. Offer incentives. The manner of the expressive style is enthusiastic, free-flowing, playful and animated. They use humour and laugh easily. They can be impatient and finish other sentences for them. They make efforts to be involved and they act impulsively. Their facial expressions are expressive and warm. Their eye contact is flighty and dancing. Their gaze is frequent. Their body movement is animated with expression. They use frequent open gestures that are large and expansive. The voice is loud, fast and modulating. The conversational flow is flexible and random. They're motivated by public praise and recognition. The basic fear is rejection. Valued words are quick, cutting edge, easy, competitive, innovative, possibilities, fun, flexible, big, huge, adjectives about potential, opportunity. The stress response of the expressive style is that they will attack. They will use verbal confrontation, which means that they will argue with people to put their point across. This is done forcefully and assertively before returning to their more friendly and pleasant approach. Amiable style people tend to be far less open or direct. They are more inclined to respond to events rather than take proactive steps themselves. They have a concern for other people, combined with a reluctance to take direct action. They're consistent and reliable in their approach, preferring to operate in situations that follow established patterns and to avoid unplanned developments. Because of this, people with the amiable style tend to be quite resistant to change and will take time to adapt to new situations. They're patient, reliable and consistent. They have the capacity to apply themselves to work, focusing on what needs to be done in a productive way. They can relate to and appreciate openness, honesty and sincerity to other people and provide support or help others. Their understanding and patient approach means that they are good team workers through offering assistance and guidance in resolving problems of a personal nature. You will have difficulty with the amiable style if you get straight to the point. Keep the discussion focused all the time. Keep offering opinions or increase the complexity of the discussion. Cause them to respond quickly. Dominate or control the discussion. Are rapid or abrupt. Make wild claims. are extremely factual. You should aim to be friendly and show interest in them personally. Have some social chat before getting down to business. Take time to ask open questions. Be informal and non-threatening. Include guarantees and be reassuring wherever possible. Give your presentation a personal touch. The manner of the amiable style is friendly, calm and relaxed. They're considerate and sincere. They easily mirror others' mannerisms. They typically allow others to take the lead. They make efforts to build relationships and act supportively. Their facial expressions are warm and varied. They smile a lot. Their eye contact is soft and caring. Their gaze is sincere, intermittent and empathetic. They have an approachable, relaxed posture. They frequently nod in agreement. Their gestures are infrequent but open and flowing. Their voice is softly spoken, slow and modulating. The conversational flow is responsive, respectful and cooperative. They're motivated by security, and so their basic fear is insecurity. Valued words are we, let's, commitment, concern, security, sensitivity, step by step, teamwork, long term. The stress response of the amiable style is that they acquiesce, they appear to give in. Analytical style people are concerned with working within the rules. They're concerned with accuracy, structure, and understanding the way things work. They like to have a clear idea of what they're doing and what is expected of them, so they're far more motivated in situations that are clearly regulated and planned. In general, the analytical style are not independent by nature, preferring not to be left to make decisions or take actions without having done a full analysis and taking care of all the specifics. The natural focus of the analytical style is on details, facts and figures, and they tend to be at their best when they have time to organise and plan their work. Their affinity for questions of accuracy and regulation means that their style tends to suit situations where high standards and quality needs to be considered. You will have difficulty with this style if you are disorganised and casual, are late, provide personal incentives, push or gently persuade, use testimonials or opinions, are flippant or use methods that try to increase the appeal around what is being discussed. You should aim to be well prepared, get straight down to business, listen carefully, be specific and logical, be persistent and thorough in questioning, be formal and unemotional when challenging. Give them time to give their point of view. The manner of the analytical style is to be punctual, deliberate and meticulous. They're diplomatic, reserved and nervous. They like to ask lots of questions. They make efforts to establish process and act cautiously. Their facial expressions are limited, unemotional, and they're not very expressive. Their eye contact is intense, serious and questioning. Their gaze is limited and reflective, occurring when answering questions. Body movement is upright, rigid and formal in posture, with limited movement. They have small, infrequent gestures that are confined to a narrow body space. Their voice is quiet, slow, measured and monotonal. The conversational flow is deliberate, precise and intensely focused. Their speech is hesitant to ensure the correct choice of words. They're motivated by standard operating procedures and quality. Their basic fear is conflict. Valued words are caution, logical, research, analysis, projections, thorough, proof, high standard. The stress response of the analytical style is to avoid. They withdraw from the situation. There will be tensions between the styles. Each style has a unique set of priorities and preferences as to whether the relationship or the task aspect of a situation is more important, and each has its own pace in terms of how fast things should be done. The driver and expressive styles tend to prefer a faster pace, while the amiable and analytical styles both tend to prefer a slower pace. These style combinations will get along well as far as pace is concerned, but watch out for their priorities. The driver and expressive styles are both relatively fast-paced, yet the expressive style places more emphasis on people than on tasks, while the driver style tends to pursue goals with less concern for relationships or feelings. Some degree of tension is likely to result in their interaction due to their differences in priority. The amiable and expressive styles place more emphasis on relationships than tasks, yet the expressive style places more emphasis on doing things more decisively and quickly, while the amiable style tends to pursue relationships or feelings in a more considered way and will prefer to take their time doing so. Some degree of tension is likely to result in their interaction due to their differences in priority. The driver and analytical styles tend to prefer a focus on the task. However, the analytical style will prefer to take their time in doing so, whilst the driver style will work with a relatively fast pace to ensure things are done quickly and efficiently. There will be much more opportunity for tension between the analytical and expressive styles due to differences both in pace and focus. There will also be opportunities for tension between the amiable and driver styles due to differences both in pace and in relationship focus. The right level of tension produces the highest level of productivity. However, your reaction to increased pressure will be affected by factors both inside and outside your work. Your way of responding will be influenced by how you've coped with similar situations in the past and how successful you were in managing your stress and anxiety at that time. It will also be influenced by your personality and your social interaction style. Each social interaction style possesses predictable behaviours when faced